technology is a good servant, but a bad master. And it can do a lot of wonderful things for us. But like any medicine, it can turn to poison. And so we have to use it wisely.
Great. Welcome, Gretchen Rubin. Welcome, Gretchen. How you doing? I'll give you a little elbow bump. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Gretchen.
Well, I'm so happy to be here, if sort of slightly disoriented by this very familiar set. I have the theme of Smelly Cat playing in my head, I'm sure, for the rest of the weekend, the rest of the day. So everyone here, I know, thinks about the customer. What does the customer want? What does the customer need? They're sitting having coffee with their friends, and they're thinking about the customer. How can we make the customer happy? Right now, we're going to talk about how can we make you happy. And this has two benefits. First, research shows that if you're happier, happier employees make customers happier. You're going to have the focus, the energy, the stamina, the patience, the sense of humor that you need to work with other people. And also, it matters because you matter. What are the tools that you can use to make yourself happier, healthier, more productive, and more creative? For years, I had been thinking and talking and writing about the subject of happiness. And I became very struck by the fact that when people talked about their happiness stumbling blocks, they very often pointed to a problem with a habit. So someone would say, well, my problem is that I'm exhausted all the time. Well, that's about the habit of going to bed on time. Or my problem is I really want to get back into meditation and I can't do it. That's about the habit of consistent progress. So I became increasingly interested in the role that habits can play in helping us to make our lives happier. And then I went to lunch with a friend, and she said something that got me obsessed with the subject of habits. She said, I know I would be happier if I exercised. And the weird thing is, when I was in high school, I was on the track team, and I never missed track practice. So why can't I go running now? Sound familiar? Same person, same behavior. At one time it was effortless, now she can't do it. What was going on? And I became determined to figure out the role that habits could play. Now, if you've thought about habits yourself, and I'm sure you have, there's sort of three big questions that come up. The first is, do I even need to be worrying about my habits? I mean, I got so much on my mind. Why do I have to think about my habits? Well, it turns out that habits are like the invisible architecture of everyday life. Research suggests that about 40% of our days are shaped by our habits, so they matter. Next is, well, what is a habit? I've come to believe that the key thing about a habit is decision-making, or rather, it's the lack of decision-making. Habits get us out of the draining, difficult business of using our self-control and making decisions. I don't decide to get up at 6 a.m. I don't decide to skip dessert. I made those decisions a long time ago. I made them habits. They're on autopilot. I don't have to think about them again. People sometimes come up to me and they say, well, you know what? I'm interested in habits because I want to go through my day making healthy choices. And I'm like, no, you don't. Because every choice is the opportunity to make the wrong choice. Choose once, use a habit, and stop choosing. But then we get to the big question, which is, okay, how then do I change a habit? And there's no shortage of expert advice, right? We've all heard it. Do it for 30 days. Do it first thing in the morning. Start small. Give yourself a cheat day. And I don't know if you've noticed, but these are strategies that work for some people, sometimes. They don't work for everybody all the time. The key step, and this is something that so many people, regular people and experts alike, it's a step they skip, which is to say, what kind of person are you? What works for you? Not for Steve Jobs, not for your sister-in-law. What kind of person are you? Because a lot of times when people are discouraged because they keep trying and failing to make a habit, it's because they've set it up in the wrong way for them. Because there are no magic one-size-fits-all solutions for habits. And the first thing to ask is what works for me. So just to take an obvious example, morning people and night people. Okay, how many people here would describe themselves as morning people? My hand's up, I'm a morning person. Okay, how many people here would describe themselves as night people? Right? There's a lot. I, as a morning person, used to believe that everybody could be a morning person if they would just go to bed on time. No. Research shows this is largely a function of genetics and age. It's a real thing. And I had a friend, hardcore night person, I've known him for years. He looked me in the eye and he said, you know what my resolution is? I'm gonna get up early every morning and go for a run before work. And I said, have you met yourself? Because no, you won't. Not because you're lazy or you have no self-control or willpower, but because you're a night person and you're at your most productive and energetic and creative later in the day. You can barely get to work on time. The idea that you're gonna get up early and go for a run, it's not right for you. It might be right for me, it's just not the right way for you. So what I'm gonna talk about now is some strategies that you can think about, maybe different things that you can tap into to help you change your habits in a way that's right for you. Because some things about habits we kind of all know. We all know about the strategy of monitoring and how effective that can be, or the strategy of scheduling and how effective that can be. So I'm gonna talk about things maybe you haven't thought of. And the first strategy I want to talk about is the strategy of abstaining. Now, there are 21 strategies that I identified that you can use to make or break your habits. And sometimes people think that 21 sounds like too many, but actually it's great that there are so many, because some work very well for some people and not for others. And the strategy of abstaining is a strategy that works very well for some people and does not work at all for others. So you must decide, are you an abstainer or a moderator? Abstainers are people like me. We're kind of all or nothing people when we're facing a strong temptation. Weak temptation doesn't matter. Strong temptation. My temptation, sweets. I have a tremendous sweet tooth. I can have no Thin Mint cookies without much difficulty. Or I can have 11 Thin Mint cookies, or a whole sleeve. But I can't have one Thin Mint cookie. I have not had half a dish of ice cream in my life. I can have none, but if I start, I'm gonna go all the way. I'm an abstainer. Moderators, by contrast, get kind of panicky and rebellious if they're told they can never do something. They need to have a little bit, or maybe they have it sometimes. You know those people who have the bar of fine chocolate in their desk drawer, and every few days they have 1 square of fine chocolate, and that's all they need? You know, unlike for me, the whole day would be 1 square, 2 squares, today, tomorrow, it's raining, it's my birthday, I deserve it, I need it. I mean, just save the time and eat the whole bar right now, right? Like, I can't have a little. And this isn't just about food. It's also things like technology. My sister, we have a podcast, Happier, my sister and I, and she talked on the podcast about how she had to give up Candy Crush altogether because it was actually affecting her career and her physical health. She couldn't play a little Candy Crush. She had to give it up all the way. But for some people, a little bit is good. They want to just play a little bit. I know a guy who said it took him an extra year to write his PhD thesis because of World of Warcraft. He couldn't play a little bit. So for some people, having moderation is great, and that works. If you struggle to be moderate, try giving something up altogether. It sounds harder, but for some people, it's easier. Now, kind of in the same vein, but much more fun, is the strategy of treats. So the strategy of treats is that we should load ourselves with healthy treats as a way to energize ourselves, right? Because as we go through our day, when we're dealing with customers or clients or colleagues or family members or whomever, we need to use our self-command. Giving ourselves treats raises our self-command. Now, it's very important to remember that a treat is not the same thing as a reward. You must earn or justify a reward. A treat you get just because you want it. And sometimes people think that giving yourself treats sounds kind of frivolous or self-indulgent, but in fact, research shows that when people do give themselves treats, they get that rise in self-command. They do funny studies about this, like having people watch like either kind of a silly video or giving them a surprise gift, and they see that their self-command rises. So you want to give yourself a lot of healthy treats because when you give more to yourself, you can ask more from yourself. Now, you don't want to give yourself unhealthy treats because you don't want to do something to make yourself feel better that in the end just makes you feel worse. And what are the unhealthy treats? I think you can guess. Food and drink, shopping, screen time. But you need to have a lot of ideas for what those treats might be. So I have a friend who buys new music on iTunes. My husband does crossword puzzles on his iPad. I have a friend who, before, she has to get her whole family out the door in the morning, so she gets dressed, gets everybody out, then she gets back into bed fully dressed for 20 minutes. She's like, it's the best part of my day. That's a little treat. A podcast, like some people say their favorite one to save for when they need a little treat. You know that feeling when you're like a cell phone that needs to get plugged into the wall? You just need that energy boost if you're going to keep control of yourself, and that's very, very valuable. Now, this other aspect of habits, I have to say, it was so contrary to what I expected to see that I almost didn't understand it when I first started observing it, but it's very important to grasp. And I noticed it because I had heard the same story from several people about the marathon. Several people told me, practically verbatim, well, I wanted to get back into the habit of exercise, so I decided I would train for the marathon. And I trained for the marathon, and it was amazing. And I ran the marathon, and I took off those rest days that you're supposed to take after you run the marathon, and I haven't run since. And this was contrary to what I would have expected, because I would have thought, oh, hitting a big finish line like running a marathon, that'd make you all the more excited about your habit, make you stick to it more. But then I started hearing from other people, oh, I gave up sugar for Lent, and I thought, this is great, I quit sugar, but now I eat more sugar than ever. Oh, my friends and I are doing a 30-day yoga challenge, and it was so great. I thought, oh, I'm going to do so much yoga. Now I don't do any yoga. What's going on? Well, it turns out that setting a goal is a great way to hit a goal. It's not a great way to form a habit. Because what happens with these goals is there's a finish line, literally a finish line in the case of the marathon. You cross that finish line, and then you're finished. And then if you keep going, you have to start over. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but starting over is harder than starting the first time, very often. So hitting that finish line makes everybody feel like, oh, now things are going to go back to normal. But with a habit, these are things that you want to do indefinitely. So when there is something that you want to make into a habit, it's much more helpful to think about milestones. Running the marathon is a thrilling milestone, but it is just one of many milestones that you will pass in a lifetime of exercise. Now, the final strategy I want to talk about is the strategy of the 4 tendencies. This is a personality framework that I don't know if I created it or I discovered it, because it feels like it's in nature. It feels more like the periodic table of the elements, or maybe it's like the Muggle sorting hat, I don't know. And it divides all of humanity into 4 categories. And these categories, once you understand them about yourself and you understand them about other people, you're going to be much better able to manage yourself and also to see how you can work and communicate more effectively with other people. Because it turns out we're really very different from each other. In most ways, we're alike. But the differences are very important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the categories. Then I'm going to go through and ask everybody to raise their hand and say what category they're in, because I think it'll be very interesting to see who's in the room. And then I'll make some observations that will be useful to you in understanding how to work with yourself and others using the 4 tendencies. So a word of warning. It sounds really boring when I start, but I promise it gets juicy, so stay with me. Do not space out. Next thing, all these tendencies have strengths and weaknesses. They all include people who are big successes and also big losers. So there is no one best tendency. It's all a matter of being honest with yourself, so be honest. And there are upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels. And I was trying to think if I could fit the friends into the four tendencies. They don't fit so nicely, though. Maybe Monica I figured out, but you will see. And this has to do with how you respond to an expectation. So we all face 2 kinds of expectations. Outer expectations, a work deadline, a request from a spouse, and inner expectations, your own desire to keep a New Year's resolution, your own desire to get back into playing the guitar. Upholders, questioners, obligers, rebels. Upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations. They meet the work deadline, they keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. Next, questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. They hate anything arbitrary or inefficient or irrational. Their first question is, why am I going to listen to you? So in a sense, they make everything an inner expectation. If it meets their criteria, they'll do it. If not, they reject it. Then obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. So this explains the mystery of my friend on the track team. When she had a team and a coach waiting for her, she had no trouble showing up. But when it was only her own expectation that she would go for a run, she struggled. And then finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. If you ask or tell them to do something, they are very likely to resist. They don't even want to tell themselves what to do. Okay, so now I'm going to go through and I want you to raise your hand. Now, if you're also, I will, as a clue, if you're thinking to yourself, I question the validity of Gretchen's framework, that's a sign that you're a questioner. Okay, so first is upholder. My hand is up because I'm an upholder. Readily meet outer and inner alike. Okay. Next, questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. They hate arbitrary, inefficient, or irrational. Okay? Obligers. Obligers readily meet outer. They struggle to meet inner. And finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. Okay, so what we saw here is exactly what I see over and over and over. It is the pattern in the world. The biggest tendency for both men and women, everywhere I go, I did a survey, you know, representative survey, obliger. Obliger is the biggest tendency. Next question. Rebel is the smallest tendency. It's a conspicuous tendency, but it's a very, very small tendency. And also my tendency, upholder tendency, also very small, only slightly bigger than rebels. Those are the two extremes. They're small. Most people are questioners or obligers. So this has a lot of implications. It can be a very helpful thing to think about. If you're dealing with yourself or you're dealing with someone else, to think, probably this person is a questioner or an obliger, so I need to think about keying in to the values and needs of that type. So now I'm going to just talk for a minute about different things that you might think about as you're dealing with the tendencies. And one thing I should say is I think for the tendencies, they're a ubiquitous, pervasive part of your personality. You're not one at 20 and one at 40. You're not one at work and one at home. This is just part of who you are. It's a narrow part of who you are. We could get 50 questioners lined up here. They would look very, very different because of all the other different parts of their personality, but on that one narrow question, they would behave the same. So when you're dealing with an upholder or you are an upholder, upholders are pretty easy for others because they meet outer and inner expectations. They don't need a lot of supervision. They don't need a lot of oversight. They're pretty good at being self-starters. But like all the tendencies, there's upsides and downsides. So the downsides of upholder, one is tightening, and this is something to watch out for. For many people, you know how it is when you start out with something and kind of the rules get looser over time? Not for upholders. For upholders, often the rules get tighter. And sometimes this can be good, but it can also become choking. So for instance, I am one of these crazy low-carb people that you read about. I really do eat a very low-carb diet. And when I started, I was pretty conscientious. Now I'm extremely conscientious. Now that's okay with me, but sometimes the tightening can become so restrictive on upholders, it can become a problem. So you want to be aware of that for upholders and help control it. The other thing is, upholders can be kind of judgmental because it's pretty easy for them to meet inner and outer expectations, and they don't always have a lot of patience or sympathy for some of the other tendencies and what the other tendencies need in order to thrive. And so it's good for upholders to be aware of this so that they can build in those structures. Next, questioners. Now, questioners help everybody not waste their time because they're the ones who are like, why are we doing this anyway? You know, it's good for everyone. But there are limitations for questioners. Questioners sometimes drain and deplete others with their incessant questioning. Everybody else is like, hey man, we got it, let's go, let's move on. And also, strangely, questioners often don't like to be questioned, which is deeply ironic but deeply annoying too. They're like, what? Like, I'm telling you this is what I'm going to do. Like, just take it from me. And they don't want to be told. They don't want to have to go through it. And also, questioners experience analysis paralysis. This can be difficult for them, and it can also be difficult for the people around them. And this is when they just want more information before they act. But sometimes in this world, we have to act without perfect information. So if you are dealing with analysis paralysis, there's sort of three things you can think about: deadlines, trusted advisors, and limits. So deadlines. I need your answer by Friday. I know that I just need your best answer. I need the best you can do by Friday. That's when I need the answer. Or trusted advisor. Well, I know I could spend a year researching what's the best bike for me to buy, but I'm just going to go into this one really good bike shop where the salespeople really know what they're talking about, and whatever they recommend, I'm going to buy. That's good enough for me. Or limits. We're going to interview 10 people for this position. We're not going to interview 30 people for this position. So that can help with questioners. Questioners sometimes can seem insubordinate, stubborn, like they're not team players, because others misinterpret their questions and makes them kind of defensive and feel like someone's not respecting their authority. So a socially skilled questioner learns how to ask questions in a way that don't set other people off, because that can be an issue. Next, obligers. So obligers are the rock of the world. You know, they're the ones who are most likely to help out if a client or a customer or a family member or a team member or friend needs a hand. They're type O. They are the ones who pair up the most easily with the other tendencies. But while they really readily meet outer expectations, they struggle to meet inner expectations, and that can be enormously frustrating to them. So here's the answer. Out of everything about the 4 tendencies, this is the most important thing I think that people have found. If you're an obliger and you're struggling to meet inner expectations, which by definition you are, because that is the definition of an obliger, the answer, the solution, very simple, put in outer accountability. For obligers to meet inner expectations, there must be structures of outer accountability. So if you want to exercise, like my friend, join a team. Take a class where you're going to have to pay even if you don't show up. Go with a friend who's going to be annoyed if you don't show up. Run with a dog who's going to pee all over the house if you don't go. Think about your own duty to your children. Oh, if I don't go for a run, you don't have to go to baseball practice. There's all different ways to build in outer accountability. There's apps, there's groups, there's all different things that we can do, but the obliger needs to realize that that is the missing piece. The other thing about obligers is there's a very, very striking pattern with obligers that matters a lot to all of us because there's so many obligers, and that is obliger rebellion. And this is a phenomenon where obligers will meet expectations, and then suddenly they snap, and they're like, this I will not do. And sometimes it's small and symbolic. Funnily enough, I've heard from many obligers who deliberately wait in their cars in the morning to be late for work on purpose because they're so mad at somebody who keeps telling them to be on time. So it can be small and funny, but it can also be enormously destructive, ending a decades-long relationship, a valuable employee walking out the door, saying like, this place is dead to me. And obliger rebellion happens when obligers feel neglected, exploited, taken advantage of. They feel like the work is not equitably distributed, they're not being heard. And it's very important for all of us around obligers to help them not get to that point, because obligers are often enormously valuable, and this obliger rebellion can be a very, very destructive pattern. So you want to say things like, you know, I see that not everybody's, like some people are on 5 committees and some people are on 2 committees. We need to make this fair. Or some people have been taking over too many extra shifts. Or, you know, everybody needs to do their own work and not help each other because we all need to meet this deadline. Help obliger rebellion not start, because once it starts, it's very hard to control. And then finally, rebels. So rebel is a powerful strategy. They can think outside the box. They love to blow up the box. They don't care what other people think. There's a lot of power to it. They want to do what they want to do, so there's tremendous authenticity and clarity with rebels. But the fact is, it can be a little annoying to work or be around somebody who, if you ask or tell them to do something, is very likely to resist. So what do you do if you're with a rebel and you would like to gently nudge them in a certain direction, but you're afraid that if you ask or tell them to do something, you're going to ignite the spirit of resistance? So there's 2 things you can think about. And this works for the rebel himself or herself too. One is to think about identity. To rebels, the idea of identity is very, very important. What kind of person am I? And so if you remind the rebel, this is what you want. This is what you choose. This is the kind of person that you are. You want to be a considerate parent. You want to be a respected leader. This is what you want. Then it's something that they can do because it's an expression of their identity. Or you can think about information consequences choice. Give the rebel the information that is necessary and the knowledge of the consequences that flow from a decision, and then allow the rebel to make the decision and step back with no reminders, no nagging, and let the consequences unfold. So you might say, let's say you have a rebel little kid. You might say, if a person goes outside on a hot sunny day, they can get a really bad sunburn. A bad sunburn really hurts. Your skin can even blister and peel, and then you're stuck inside all day while your friends are out playing because you got to wait for your sunburn to go away. Do you feel like wearing sunscreen lotion or a long sleeve t-shirt and hat? Information, consequences, choice. But you have to back away and let the consequences unfold. And this is easier said than done, but it is the thing that works for rebels. Very often, I hear from people who are like, I've been helping this rebel, I've been reminding them, I've been doing all these helpful steps, and yet the rebel just won't do it. They're procrastinating, they're refusing to do it. And I'm like, you're the problem. The more you remind, the more you suggest, the more you hover, the more you're igniting that spirit of resistance. That rebel might easily have done that task already if they didn't feel like they had to resist you. This is very, very hard to kind of wrap your mind around, but it's very important because the rebel can do whatever the rebel wants to do. So the last thing I would say about the tendencies and about this framework in general is that sometimes people feel uncomfortable with saying morning people and night people, or abstainers and moderators, or upholders, questioners, obligers, rebels, with this idea that, well, if you define me, you can find me. And I get that. But I also believe that there is an advantage in having a vocabulary or having ideas of ways that we can put our fingers on ways that we're different from each other. Because a lot of times our impulse is to say, I'm right and you're wrong, or I'm wrong and you're right. And it's not that there's a right way and a wrong way. It's whatever works for you. And if we need to work together, we need to find a way for both of us to find a way to thrive. And when we understand these differences, then we can take them into consideration. So for instance, if you're talking to somebody on the phone and this person is asking you question after question after question, it's very easy to start to feel something like, this person doesn't respect me. This person doesn't trust my judgment. This person doesn't understand my authority, and become very defensive and antagonized and impatient. But if you can say to yourself, you know what? I bet I'm dealing with a questioner here, and I'm just going to have to go let this run its course, because once this questioner gets questions answered, they will be completely on board, but I can't shorten that. I can't thwart that, because if they don't get their questions answered, they're not going to come on board. Or with someone like an obliger, if you're not getting an answer from somebody, and you think, oh, well, you know, I didn't want to push, or I didn't want to press, you might say to yourself, well, maybe this is an obliger who needs some form of outer accountability. I'm waiting for an answer, but I need to say something like, you know what? Why don't we do this? You ponder, and then I'll email you on Friday, or I'll give you a call on Friday, and you can tell me then what your answer is, because I need that information in order to go forward. Now you've created specific outer accountability, and that's very helpful for an obliger, because now there's something for them to push against, something that's going to trigger their action. Or you might be talking to somebody who's just resisting everything you're saying. Everything you say, they contradict. Everything you say, they're naysaying. Back up. Then you want to go into the words of choice and freedom. This could be interesting to you. This is something you could think about trying if you felt like it was right. I don't know. Some people have found this to be useful. Some people not so much. It just might be something for you to think about. If you try this, we've seen that this happens. And that's what most people want. But it's totally up to you. Again, by using the language that appeals to them, by using their values, you're just going to get to the same place of success, but in a much more efficient way. I really do think that by trying to find these angles to understand ourselves better and to understand other people better is really helpful. Because when we understand ourselves, our interests, our values, our temperament, then we can construct a life that's going to make us happier. And then when we understand how other people might be like us or different from us, then it's much easier to be respectful of those differences and to meet them halfway. So it really does pay off to take the time to think about your nature and to think about your habits, because if you change your habits, you can change your life. Thank you.